Okay, so finally, for the East Asian realm, we're going to talk about Korea. And Korea, the Korean Peninsula, North and South Korea together, is about the size of Idaho. Um, there are 75 million people divided between the two states. It was historically a migration corridor to Japan. And because of the historical split of Korea into two countries, North and South, it has been called the world's saddest political geographical tragedy. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. Okay, so after World War II, and you're probably sensing a theme here that uh, World War II had a really profound impact on the East Asian realm. After World War II, the Korean Peninsula was set up as the stage of a great power conflict between China, um, communist armies supported by China, and anti-communist forces supported by America. So this led to the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. And the interesting thing about this is that the five great powers that were allied in World War II were the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, and China. So those five fought together as allies in World War II. But so immediately following World War II, they were the main players in setting up the structures that would become the United Nations. But it didn't take very long before the communist nations, China and Russia, started sort of fighting against the anti-communist forces, the US, the UK, and France, and competing for power and influence in many places around the world. So that's what led to these proxy wars, like in Afghanistan, like we talked about in the last lecture. So another one of these proxy proxy wars was fought in Korea. And in Korea, this is one where the U.S. military went in directly, but the Soviet Union and China did not, but they were providing support and influence to North Korea. Now, another interesting thing is that the Korean War might never have happened because the United States actually went to the United Nations Security Council to ask permission, basically, to launch this war in Korea. And any of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council could have vetoed that request. The 5 permanent members are the 5 great powers that fought together in World War II, the US, the UK, France, Russia, and China. And those 5 members have permanent veto powers. So any one of them, it just takes one of them to veto a request. And so when the US came and said, we want to send in troops to support the forces in Southern Korea, either Russia or China could have vetoed that request. But the reason they didn't is because, if you remember back to the beginning of this lecture, the nationalist government of China that is now sitting in Taiwan was in China's seat in the UN. So it wasn't the communist government of China in the United Nations, it was the nationalist government of China. And they weren't going to veto this request because they were very anti-communist and they were trying to fight the communists themselves. So The nationalist government is in the United Nations Security Council. The communists are not. And Russia was actually protesting the fact that the nationalists, the Chinese nationalists, were in the United Nations instead of the communists. And so they weren't there because they were boycotting the whole thing. And so the two communist nations that could have vetoed this war were not there in the Security Council. And so because of that, the war happened. So kind of an interesting bit of history there. So the Korean War happened. It lasted for 3 years. It cost over 3 million lives. And both sides made gains. They kind of went back and forth. But by the ceasefire in 1953, they drew the ceasefire line basically back where they started. So right at the 38th parallel. And the area, the kind of buffer zone around the 38th parallel, is called the demilitarized zone. And so post-Korean War, the north part of the peninsula, North Korea, was communist and very, very isolated. South Korea became capitalist. They became one of the Asian tiger economies. Engaged in world trade. And so today you see a really amazing contrast between the two. So in North Korea has about half the population of South Korea. They have experienced about 7 decades of the harshest communist rule. They are one of the poorest, hungriest, and most regimented countries on earth. But they also have one of the largest standing armies. One reason for concern is that they have nuclear weapon technology and missile technology. And so they regularly, or at least occasionally, kind of saber rattle and threaten thermonuclear war against South Korea, and claim that they have missiles that can hit the United States. So there is a continuous military presence along the demilitarized zone, or that 38th parallel. You've probably heard of the kind of gulag-style prison camps that North Korea is known for. So if you are a political dissident, or somebody else who's considered a threat or a criminal, you are sent to a kind of a hard labor camp. Okay, so North Korea, ever since its creation, has been ruled by the same family. Kim Jong-il passed away in 2011. He had taken over control of North Korea from his father, Kim Il-sung. And when Kim Jong-il passed away, he passed on control of North Korea to his son, Kim Jong-un. So this is kind of an illustration of what it means to live in North Korea with this dictatorship. These are pictures from Kim Jong-il's funeral. And so this is his funeral procession over here on the right. And media from North Korea is so strictly controlled that when they released these pictures of the funeral procession to the global media, they had airbrushed out these people standing over here because and one of them is obviously a cameraman, but they didn't want it to look like there was anybody that had their attention turned away from Kim Jong-il. So that's just the kind of level of control of the perception that is instituted in North Korea. And then the people on the left, these are pictures of people mourning Kim Jong-il after he passed away. And the prevailing opinion is that these people are probably um, hamming it up, I guess, for lack of a better term, because if you are found not grieving hard enough for the dear leader, you would be thrown into a gulag. And so you better make a really good show of being absolutely devastated that he has passed away. Okay, another illustration of just kind of the level of development. Here's the Korean Peninsula. So at night, you can see South Korea is lit up. You can see Seoul pretty obviously there. It's very light. North Korea is largely dark. So, and you can see it even better down here on the bottom picture. So, just kind of an illustration of the disparity of development between the two countries. This is a picture that was kind of made the rounds in the media a few years ago. So this is Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, and he he regularly goes around and tours factories. It's kind of a photo op thing. Where he'll go around and tour factories and industry and different things that are happening around North Korea. And so this is a machine lubricant factory, and I'm not sure what he's doing, but something to make the lubricant come out. But this picture gained a lot of attention because of the difference in expression on the two men's faces, and also because of the difference in their body size. So it looks like this is a very hungry country. A lot of people are not getting adequate nutrition or adequate food, and it looks like the worker on the left is probably not as well nourished as Kim Jong-un. So it's just kind of the dichotomy between the two made this picture go viral. Okay, so to compare that with South Korea is an economic giant in the world. They're the world's leading shipbuilder, one of the Asian tigers. They have, of course, a successful car company, Kia. They're a manufacturer of iron, steel, chemicals, electronics. They have ample food. We're going to talk about that one on the next slide. And major cosmopolitan cities in Seoul and other core areas. Okay, so I said earlier that this is one of the saddest geopolitical tragedies on the planet. So why? Why is that? One reason is that Korea historically was not divided into North and South Korea, and so the two Koreas are really the same culture. They speak the same language. They're the same ethnicity. Historically, they're the same culture. And when the division went up, many families were divided. So it's really an arbitrary line that doesn't reflect anything geographically or ethnically. The other reason it's such a tragedy is that the two Koreas really need each other for this idea of regional complementarity. So the North has more of the raw materials that could help drive economic growth, and the South produces more food. So I said, the North is really lacking in food. The South has more food. If you look at the right here, the map on the right, South Korea has that nice green climate, the humid temperate climate that's best for agricultural production. The north is entirely humid cold, which doesn't preclude agricultural production, but they really don't have a very long growing season. So they're going to be shorter on agricultural products than further south. So if they could trade with each other, they would both be better off. But because of the historical situation, that trade doesn't happen. The line between them is called the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. And it's called the most heavily militarized border in the world. One of the more interesting things about it is that there's a building right along the DMZ that has a table that's right on the line. And so whenever, in the rare event that North and South Korean officials get together, they meet at that table and they both sit on their respective sides of the table because neither one is going to cross the border into the other's country. So they can meet at this table where the border goes right through the middle of the table and neither of them has to cross into the other Korea. So it's kind of an interesting tidbit there. Okay. So that's all for the East Asian module. There's a couple of videos up, including a K-pop video. So you're probably all familiar with K-pop, but it comes from Korea, South Korea mostly, and has been gaining popularity on the world stage. So I'll throw one of those videos up for you, and be sure to take the quiz and contact me with any questions. So take care, everyone.